Good morning, everyone. This is the Topeka City Council Policy and Finance Committee. This is May 10th, 2019, 9 a.m. in the first floor conference room in the Holiday Building. My name is Jeff Cohen. I'm the chair of the committee, and I'm going to call this meeting to order. First item up is to approve the minutes of the last meeting, April 29th. I'll entertain a motion to approve those.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Motion passes. Minutes are approved. Okay, Mrs. City Attorney,
Thank
here
you,
we
Chair.
are again.
Thank you, Chairperson Cohen. As you know, our last meeting was April 29th. And at that meeting, we talked about comparisons between the provisions of certain personnel code provisions and where policies and ARRs and such that have been developed over the course of the past couple of decades, where those documents kind of fold into those particular personnel code provisions. Last time we talked about Article 2, and we started with Section 6. We went all the way through the end of Article 2 through Section 13, and then we got all the way through Article 3, which had 4 sections, so we went through Section 1 through Section 4. And so today we're going to start and go through the same exercise, start with Article 4, and we are hoping to make it all the way through Article 7, since we kind of chugged through that very well. But before we do that, there were a couple of questions that you all had asked us to look into for this meeting, and I wanted to kind of let the folks here who looked into those issues kind of talk through those with you. One was on the tuition reimbursement piece, maybe if you don't stay for X amount of time that you have to reimburse a piece of it. And the other would be a conflict of interest kind of cheat sheet. And I think, and participating in elections, whether or not you need to take a leave of absence. So I'll let Catherine talk about the conflict of interest piece and the election piece first. And then Jackie will talk about the tuition reimbursement.
Okay, conflict of interest. There is one resolution that was passed back in 2004 that applies to the governing body, and that's resolution number 7473. It's very broad. It has no enforcement mechanisms within it, but that is something that the governing body could refer to for conflict of interest questions.
Okay.
The biggest part of conflict of interest is from the state statute and the SOSI, Statement of Substantial Interest, that you must complete. And that's the guiding piece. And we have passed out today a one-page kind of little check sheet or cheat sheet that you might find helpful. I think the one that we probably get the most questions from in the legal department is receiving more than $500 in goods and services throughout the year. Those have to be reported, and once they're reported, you can vote. So the basic rules are, as long as you report your potential conflicts of interest, then you can vote. It is, however, I think it's a misdemeanor to vote on something that you have a conflict of interest with, as determined by the state statutes. Is that helpful, or do you have any?
The other thing
go
that,
through it.
and we had talked to, I'm sorry, I wanted to kind of throw this in. We had talked about whether or not to codify this specific language in either the, we can't put it in the personnel manual, it doesn't apply to you. Personnel manual would just apply to employees, but to codify it in the TMC, and kind of the thought, the back and forth that we all had was, given the fact that state statutes might change, the language might change, the numbering might change, what have you, that it might just be better just to have this kind of very succinct one-page document that each council member will get and perhaps keep, or that we'll keep in our office, and anytime a council member says, hey, can I see that conflict of interest information, we can provide that. Because if we codify it in the TMC, I think the issue that we'll have is, as we're seeing now, that we haven't done as good a job of keeping up with revising the code and keeping it up to speed with where things are, and I don't want that to start happening again. So we can either refer directly to the state statute, or we'll have this kind of succinct summary available rather than just duplicating in the code. That's kind of where we were thinking, but obviously that's something that you all might have a differing opinion on. I mean,
What's the committee think?
Mr. Chair, if I might, I think this is fantastic. You know, one of the struggles that we have as council people is the perceived conflict of interest from the constituency in various things that we vote on. So I would love to see something like this. You know, I mean, these are very clear guidelines. It's easy to understand. I'd love to see something like this put on the council website. So if a constituent has a concern, I can refer them to a very concrete, easy to understand set of guidelines that govern whether or not there's a conflict of interest in something. Because often perception is reality to folks. And I've run into an issue more than once where there is no real conflict of interest, but there's their perception of such. I have no concrete guidelines I can refer them back to. And the fact that this references state statute is even better, because that's the quote unquote higher power. So I think this is excellent. I'm not necessarily, I know codifying it locks it in too much stone, but perhaps this is a policy and the resolution just refers to the current policy that meets, currently accepted, just like the generally accepted accounting principles. This is the currently accepted conflict of interest principles that we all attain.
we can do that, absolutely. It's a good idea. Anybody else have any?
Okay.
Mr. Chair, yes, I agree with Mr. Jensen. I think as well as your point earlier, that I think having this like in our TMC or even in codified in any way would just be duplication. And unless we're going to duplicate everything in the state law in our TMC, which I don't think we want to start doing. It is interesting to me that if you run an unprofitable business, it's fine.
Yeah, it is.
It's only if you make money.
Yeah.
So a lot of years this would apply to me, unprofitable. I mean, I'd be able to escape any of this.
The unprofitable.
Yes,
vote a lot during those
I can
years.
vote a lot, yeah, because unprofitable things, do a lot of unprofitable things. So, no, I agree with that. This would be great to have this on the website.
So then the second issue that was kind of a follow-up is the election issue, and that in particular was whether or not a city employee who wishes to run for either city office or office in another political subdivision, such as a school board or state office, would have to take a leave of absence in order to do so. So again, Catherine has some information on that.
We put out a question on the city attorney's listserv and asked for some responses, and we did get some, and then Liz also made a few inquiries and got a couple other cities. But basically, there is a state statute which prohibits a city employee using city time to campaign or to endorse a particular candidate. And that's state or any political subdivision. So you can't use city time. That's should be a
Sure, agreed.
standing principle. Then there's most of this, all the cities prohibit a city employee running for council member or mayor while they're a city employee. They must either resign or take a leave of absence. Some of them, resignation is the only option, but it's a split between those two things. Then a lot of the cities provide that you can't be a candidate for an elected office which creates a conflict or is incompatible with your city employment. And stricter, the Wyandotte County talks about employees that receive federal funds. And our particular personnel manual doesn't address that, but those are stricter requirements. So that's the information we have. And that's information from, Manhattan, Olathe, Overland Park, Wyandotte County, Wichita, Lawrence. So it's pretty standard to not allow employees to be candidates for
So if
local.
somebody wants to run for school board and they want to do it in the evenings and on the weekends, they still have to take a leave of absence to do so?
In our policy, that would be correct. However, we did talk about adding language that, because our language is, if it is I can't remember exactly, if it is interferes with your position. But if that should be a city manager call, I think. So if an employee wanted to run for 501 Board of Education position, that could be an exception.
I just don't want to dissuade people right out of the gate from public service because people have to make money to support their families. And if the thought that I have to, quit my job or lose my income to run for office, I'd go pretty quickly not run for office.
I have a question. Yeah, we had a staff of the county, Parks and Rec staff run for county commissioner this last cycle. And did they have to take a leave of absence to run for their position? Yeah.
I believe that Mr. Rippon had been retired from Parks and Rec and then ran after he retired from the county.
Okay.
Is that not? No?
Well, okay.
He retired before he took office.
Did he? Okay.
I thought
So
he
I'm
was
not
still
sure
employed.
then.
I'm not familiar with the county rules on
Yeah,
that.
not familiar. If I could, a few scenarios that have occurred during my employment with the city and how we've handled those exceptions. We did have an employee that ran for the Seaman Board, school board, and that employee was not required to take a leave of absence because it was not determined to be a conflict with their regular job duties based on the position that they hold within the city. We did have another employee that, that person, I guess for the school board, was not in a management position. We did have another employee that ran for an elected position of sheriff, and they were in a management position at that time. And they did take a leave of absence during the campaigning through the election.
Okay.
So that would be kind of how, two scenarios of how we've handled the
Fairly
current language
reasonable.
and looked at the circumstance. And it's kind of dependent on the interaction and the influence of decision-making that the employee has compared to the position that they might be running for when it's not been a city elected position.
Great.
So I decide I'm going to run for something and I declare. Do I immediately have to take a leave of absence in or wait until the traditional 6-week window before an election to...
We've really had it be that window of time when they're
Okay.
actively campaigning and up to the election.
Anything else?
No, there's no good answer here. Is
There
there?
isn't.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's the nature of just working for the city, entity is.
Yeah. I do appreciate the comment about making it so that it doesn't interfere with your job. I mean, to me, that just makes common sense. And then you're right, that could fairly easily be determined given the amount of time and what shift you work and that sort of thing. So,
Okay, so the last issue that we had was the tuition reimbursement question about whether or not I think the question was raised in respect to would they be able to have to pay back a portion of the tuition payment made if they didn't stay employed with the city for X number of years. So I think Jackie has some information on that.
And And that certainly is a clause that you do see in organizations, both private and public entities. And so we could add to the personnel manual some language along the lines of that in the event the undersigned employee voluntarily leaves employment with the city of Topeka within 12 months, or a time frame that you all think is reasonable, of receipt of tuition reimbursement, he or she agrees to reimburse the city in full for the amount of tuition reimbursement received. There would need then to be an accompanying signed acknowledgement that the city would sign before receiving that reimbursement, that they understand that they would have to repay if they voluntarily left employment. But that is definitely feasible and something that's I've seen, and my research shows that a lot of private entities especially do that.
An option for payback might also be to forfeit any unused vacation.
Or have it be deducted from that balance.
Yep. That's how one of the jobs I had worked. So I think that's excellent. It protects our investment in that employee, I believe. So.
Excellent. Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On that, is there a limit to the tuition reimbursement? Is it a nominal amount, or is it?
It's $1,000 per calendar year based on available funding.
Okay.
And for the most part, that's pretty consistent among all of the labor agreements as well.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Are there any more items of old business? Okay.
Okay,
Yeah,
so we'll dive right in and start up with Article 4 of the Personnel Code. So again, we've provided a packet of information, tried to put on the cover sheet exactly what section of the Personnel Code we're looking at, and then what corresponding ARRs or policies that have been adopted by the city administratively over the course of the past 2 decades kind of cover that same subject matter. I think that you'll find again today is what we found on April 29th, that the ARRs and the policies that have been adopted administratively are a lot more robust and comprehensive than what you'll find in the Personnel Code. But the first is classification and pay plan, Article 4, Section 1 of the code, and the complementary ARR is number 133, and Personnel Manual Sections 4.1 and 4.2. We didn't get an ARR adopted to cover compensation pieces, so we kind of just want to talk through, I guess, what our ideas are on that. But on the ARR 133, we did do one on position descriptions, and those are referenced in Section 1 of the Personnel Code. You'll see it, it's on pages 24 and 25. Tried to mark it with green highlights so you all know what, can easily find what we're looking at. And then as you page through, you'll actually see the ARR that's on position descriptions. Gives a brief overview of what those are used for, and what the content is to be. I mean, we use them obviously so that employees understand what it is that they're tasked with doing, and we use it as a benchmark for doing performance evaluations and implementing compensation increases as well. And I also attached then, if you leave the next page on, this would be a draft personnel manual page on 46. It's got Section 4 at the top. It says classification and compensation, time and attendance, Fair Labor Standards Act. So in this definitions 4.1, this is where we kind of talk about position and classification. We give a definition of what the management and executive classification and pay plan is, bargaining unit agreements, and then what maintenance of the classification and pay plan entails. And I believe, I'm not sure what year that was, Jackie, that the council adopted the pay plan. It was in 2017, I think. I might be misspeaking on that one, but okay. So if you all have any questions on that particular piece, we're happy to talk over those with you.
Does anybody have any questions?
just a little clearer, a little bit more, I guess, drilled down so you can kind of follow more easily than what you find in the personnel code.
Very good.
Okay. So the next packet would be Personnel Code Article 4, Section 2A and B, and this is entitled Compensation. If you look at it on the corresponding pages 25, just one page, 25 in the Personnel Code, it's fairly succinct. And what you'll find behind that is Administrative Rule and Regulation 101 and ARR 118 and ARR 131. And those particular ARRs deal with temporary assignments, which encompasses acting and out-of-class assignments, relocation expenses, and merit increases. So in ARR 101, what really we're drilling down to is compensation for an acting assignment. We've just clarified it's minimum of the grade or 5% above current salary, whichever is greater. And if you're bumped up to an out-of-class assignment, it's up to 3% above his or her current salary. So we specify that a little bit more. And then in relocation expenses, I think, not sure why I have that one in there. Oh, because it's a form of compensation if relocation expenses are approved. I wanted to ask Jackie a question on this just to kind of help me out, because when we do relocation costs, I'm not sure exactly how wide-ranging that's applied or how often that's applied.
It's generally applied to management level positions, and the department director would request relocation, and that approval is part of the consideration of the position review committee when they are requesting to fill the vacant position. So typically we see that with some of our, with many of the department director level, division director level positions, and then those more challenging to fill positions such as our engineering positions that we would have a request up front. The reason why we require it to be part of the request to fill is so that it then is applied regardless of who the candidate identified would be.
Jackie, how often do we ask an employee to temporarily fill a position like that?
It varies. It's not uncommon if you have like a deputy director and you get a vacant department director level position to have an interim period where that deputy is placed in out of class and acting as an interim director. What we see more often is there might be large special projects, be it, for example, a recent one would be the implementation of the new utility billing system, where we take somebody out of their regular position in an out-of-class status to work on that dedicated project that might be of a higher level than their home position, and then we would do out-of-class pay. Another way that we do use out-of-class and acting is to help with professional development and internally growing people and preparing them for next level positions. And you'll see that particularly with our utility positions. So we might have a utility system worker that we put in an out-of-class rotation for 90 days or 6 months to allow them to serve as a lead role. And that's more of a professional development tool that we use.
Yeah, excellent.
Is this a good place to ask if there's a possibility of doing some kind of bonus for moving to the actual city proper for like a period of 5 years or something like that? And my interest would be making that available to any existing or new city employee who chooses to live within the city limits and commits to, or, you know, maybe you give them $100 a year up to $500 or something like that. And this could apply to current employees that live in the county but don't pay city property tax. And so if you move within the city proper, then you could, you know, earn a $100 a year bonus for up to 5 years for living within the city and paying our property taxes.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, Tony. I'm a little bit more, easy going. You don't have to
Okay,
ask for
okay.
permission. We can just talk.
Okay. Yeah, Mr. Jensen, actually, I think that's a great suggestion. I wonder, though, if in calculating the amount, should it be maybe the differential between county property tax and city property tax on I don't know.
It could be. I was just thinking of a quick and dirty, number to rattle off to somebody who, if you're going to come to our community, if you choose to buy a house within the city, then here's this compensation bonus you could get if you commit. I shouldn't say commit. If you live there for a year, and maybe what it is a rebate on your property tax. Perhaps that we'll write you a $100 check back if you're there. And I don't know how this could work, but I'm looking for incentives to get people to pay our property taxes within the city, as opposed
Expand our tax
not that we
base,
don't want
yeah.
people to live in the county. I mean, that's an excellent place to live, and it is an option for our employees.
Well, you live in the county, too, if you're in the city.
And this is true,
get to pay
but
both.
you just don't pay the property tax in the county that funds the city government.
That's right. And I believe the county property tax levy is actually higher. I believe there's more mills in the county tax than there are in the city. But it's nearly double if you live in the city, or
Right.
it's maybe,
Yeah.
maybe 80% more
Yeah.
or something. I'm trying to think I was trying to think what's a meaningful number.
I mean, $500 to me is a chunk of change. That would certainly sway a decision, especially if I'm looking at what the property taxes cost.
Right.
So-
I'm just thinking, though, a lot of times it's probably more than, and you're saying over 5 years, though, correct, for $500?
Well, what I don't want is somebody to buy a house in the city for a year to get the $500 bonus and then move to the county.
Right. No, and sure, and I understand wanting to have it 4 or 5 years. My question is, though, $100 a year is not as meaningful as like $500 a year, for instance.
That's true, I suppose. So,
Because I'm thinking it's probably on most houses, it's probably at least $1,000 extra to live in the city versus the county for a given house.
Same size.
Yeah.
well, we certainly don't have to come up with the answer today, but
Sure.
as part of relocation expenses, or that particular portion, and maybe this isn't the right place for that. I don't know. I'm looking to staff for some guidance, but
Are you talking about, Councilmember Jensen, more as like a recruitment? tool,
both a recruitment tool, and if an existing employee moves from the county into the city, I think they should qualify for this particular incentive. I mean, the whole point is to get people to pay the city property taxes, because we desperately need those, especially as we talk about how we grow programming in the city. And if that's an incentive tool that we could offer as the city, then it's easy to go to another business and say, well, look, the city is going to incentivize its employees to live within the city limits. I would encourage you to do the same thing. We're leading by example at that point.
Okay. All right, we can definitely look into that and then we'll start
But
the
at the
next
same
meeting
time,
with it.
you can't bankrupt the city coffers to try and get ready to move here. So there's a delicate balance, I feel, here, where a small amount of money, to the city budget could be a huge amount of money to an individual and make it
Right.
worthwhile. Because you're right, it costs substantially more to live in the city, although we have some great amenities that justify it.
Absolutely. And what I like about that doesn't take anything away from the county, because
Right.
you're also paying
Absolutely.
the county. So,
Yep, our partners across the street can still fund their programs.
absolutely.
Okay. And then the final ARR that I've attached in dealing with compensation, it's ARR 131. It talks about merit increases. We've really kind of done a big push with the merit increase. We've got a new software system, a new performance evaluation system. It's, really working well, I think, in my experience at least. So we just kind of put onto paper how it works and makes it a little bit clearer, I think. So that's all for,
Question on that.
Yeah.
I remember back in my Air Force days, I don't remember if it was twice a year or once a year, they would rate you. And it kind of eventually became, not a joke, but, it was basically you had to be firewalled if you wanted to keep advancing. And so there were very, very few times when someone didn't basically get under our classification, I think would be a 5 across the board. Getting a 4 in any category basically meant your career was over. With the city, how often are people getting, I guess, over time, does it become grade inflation? Is everybody getting an A? Or is there some guidelines that so many of the people have to be average, so many have to be outstanding, like some companies do?
So this is a relatively new merit-based system that was put into place really with the implementation, adoption by the governing body of the new pay plan in 2017. So we've had 2 evaluation cycles so far. What we've tried to do is we do a lot of education with supervisors and managers and employees of what is meets expectations versus exceeds expectations. And meeting expectations is doing your job. A 5, we kind of use the term, to get a 5, that means that you're pretty much exceeding expectations in everything you do every day of the year that you come to work. And that's not real easy to attain.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times when we will see those exceeds and outstandings are if someone has come into a position where maybe there's been a vacancy for a long period of time and they've had to clean up or develop processes and procedures. You might see a 5 in that particular rating period. But the other education point is that once they get that in place and that kind of becomes the standard of how that job is expected, to just maintain that is meeting expectations. It's not a continuation of exceeding. So we don't necessarily look for the bell curve that you might think of in some aspects, but the other piece to that is that the department directors have to review all of their department's evaluations, and then they really have to come back to the position review committee and explain and justify those outliers. On the exceeds side, they've really got to explain why that they are comfortable with how that manager has rated them. And then if it's below meets or needs improvement, you'll see in the ARR that we've requested at least a performance improvement plan. And then if that does not get performance to meets expectation, a formal corrective action of a performance probationary period. So we do try to manage it on both ends.
Okay, excellent, thank you.
Does anybody else have any questions on 131?
Okay. The next article or section would be under Article 4, Section 2C2, and this one is entitled Use of Private Vehicle. It is, 2 sentences long, and we have an actual policy, P104, that's entitled Vehicle Use, and the information that's covered in those 2 sentences of the Personnel Code is covered in the P104, the highlighted provision, section, I think it's Roman numeral 7. It says use of private vehicles. So you've got, a lot more information there in regard to vehicle use, plus in Roman numeral 9, the driver safety guidelines are a little bit more explicit. So again, the 2 sentences in the Personnel Code have been replaced with a lot more additional information in the policy that's been adopted over the course of the last
And this
couple
covers the
decades.
use of the council jet? Oh, you guys didn't know about that? Oh,
We have a jet?
It's in Tony's hangar.
Don't let those rumors get out. That's
the city does not have a jet for the council.
No, we're not eating caviar and riding on private jets.
Are there any questions on the private? Okay. So the next that we have is Article 4, Section 2C3. This deals with a clothing and cleaning allowance. Again, page 26 of the Personnel Code is attached. And then also attached is the policy that the city's adopted, and it's P108, and it's entitled Taxability of Work Clothing and Uniforms, and it's a 1.5-page policy that kind of amplifies what's in the Personnel Code.
Yeah, so the IRS does allow them to deduct those requirements, don't they, or do they not? those expenses. I mean, I think there is a line in there called something work.
If you
related.
itemize.
Yeah, if you itemize, yeah.
But I think in the event, and I'm not a accountant, but I believe in the event that it's provided, it's, well, again, I guess I shouldn't be saying that at all because I don't know, I don't know the rule, but anyway, so I'll shut up now.
It just basically says in the policy that they're to comply with IRS guidelines, so then they just know that they have to work with the Administrative and Financial Services Department to make sure that they do everything in the right manner.
And I could tell you that this was actually drafted in the intention of trying to provide a guideline for complying with those IRS guidelines and finance. We worked very closely with them on this policy. But if it is provided, then it's not tax deductible, of course. If it is logoed and it's not, there's some criteria that it really should not be able to transfer into casual clothing or whatever. So if it's something that would be easily for employees to wear outside of the course of their work, then the IRS regulation basically would determine it to be taxable if you received that.
Okay.
But if there is gear or clothing required for your work that is not provided by your employer, then employees can deduct that. So, for example, if we didn't provide safety boots, but we required safety boots and the employee had to make that purchase, they could deduct that expense from their taxes.
Any more questions on work uniforms? Okay.
There aren't any issues with those now, are there? Okay.
Not that I'm aware of.
No. We provide most uniforms, and that's outlined in most of our bargaining unit agreements. And then we do not provide as many logoed items for employees that aren't out in the field or representing the city to make sure that we're complying with the IRS regulations.
Gotcha.
Okay, the next one we have is Article 4, Section 2C, 1 and 4, and this talks about professional dues payments and tools and equipment. This one is really, I didn't attach any corresponding ARR or policy because most of these are adopted either just by department rule or regulation or an SOP per department because, for instance, we do professional dues payments in the legal department for, the Kansas Bar Association or what have you, and that's a departmental rule. Like, we will reimburse folks for those because they have to be, part of professional organizations, and that's something that we want to encourage, whether it's tools and equipment. There's going to be standard operating procedures on, how those are used and what are needed. So we didn't really do an ARR or a policy on that. There isn't one existing, at least that I'm aware of, because I think that all of those are covered per department, because all the departments are just different. Anything else on that, Jackie? Next is Personnel Code Article 4, Section 2C5. This deals with meals. There is a corresponding actual policy on this one that's entitled Food and Beverage that is a lot more robust, but in particular in Section 2A and B, where it talks about travel expenses and business meetings or workshops and how meals are to be purchased. The city's travel policy is very, very explicit, and you'll see that in a separate package of information, but it's very explicit on how meals are handled, how employees are reimbursed for those. And then just business meetings and workshops, if a meal may be provided as part of that at the meeting's formal agenda, but no catered meals will be allowed. But there's an exception at the discretion of the department director.
Do we have a per diem policy, and do the meals, if you're, I'm trying to think, is when I had that, if the company paid for meal, I had to deduct part of that from my per diem. and vice versa. You couldn't get per diem and a paid meal on the same day is essentially where I was going at.
One or the other?
We do, and that is included in the travel policy that Lisa referenced. But per diem, it is based on the federal reimbursement rate, and then it kind of determines when the employee is traveling. And then if it's for a training conference, they have to provide the agenda for that conference, and finance does an audit. If it was lunch provided, for example,
Sure.
then they would not get per diem for that part of the day.
Right. Okay. Okay. Good enough.
Okay, the next is Article 4, Section 3. This deals with probationary periods. This one in the Personnel Code was a little bit disjointed. It was a little bit hard to follow, but the ARR 132 that we have attached, which is entitled Performance Evaluations and Probation, we're hoping provides a little bit more clarity. This is one that we really recently worked on to, I guess, help put it in a more orderly fashion. It was kind of, in the Personnel Code, just kind of splashed here and there. This kind of starts with annual evaluations and then talks about initial probationary evaluations, then interim probationary evaluation, performance probationary period. It makes it kind of a little bit more logical as you look at it, and addresses each of the probationary periods separately and what happens during each of those. And then talks about what happens with successful completion and then where you can appeal an unsatisfactory or performance appraisal. So hopefully that'll help employees a little bit more. But again, much more explicit, much more detailed, so that it's easier. The whole goal is to try to make it easier for employees to just go to one place and look to see what it is they need to know about whatever subject matter they're looking at as far as personnel goes. So if there are any questions about probation,
Do we allow tuition reimbursement during the probationary period?
Probably should.
We do not.
Okay.
Good question.
any other questions on probation?
I'm good.
Okay. Again, I mean, we're going through these fast, and we don't, expect you all to, have read all of these or anything. I mean, they're,
What, we
again,
didn't
as we
have to
talked
read
about at
these?
Sorry, you stayed up late last night.
as we
I
talked
haven't been to
about,
bed yet.
as we talked about at the first meeting, with the change in the form of government, these are now all administrative functions and not policy. So we're not expecting you to read through all of these administrative matters. We just kind of want, again, to go through and show you what it looked like in the Personnel Code when it was under a strong mayor form of government, and what we're looking to move forward to with, the city manager form of government. So,
Lisa, are we going to be removing these lines from the personnel code and using the administrative documents instead? Is that what we're going to eventually do? And
from my perspective, my recommendation would be that anything that is very policy driven, whether there are certain things that deal with personnel that still really need to be a governing body function. So, for instance, we've all talked about one of those would be like severance payments, budgetary related matters. Those are things that really the governing body should have some form of say-so in it. And those, we think, should be codified into maybe the TMC in a particular section. I think right now under Article 2, there's a division that talks about employees. So maybe just take those kinds of pieces from the Personnel Code as it exists and draft them a little bit better and put them in the code. And then anything that would be just purely administrative, like, the uniform allowance or the travel policy or, those types of things, probation and personnel evaluations, that those be in a separate document that would just be called a personnel manual.
right.
So all these ARRs that have been developed and the policies that you see, that are attached that kind of show you the comparison between the personnel code that is now and all the ARRs and policies that have been adopted in the last 2 decades, just so you see that anything administrative that's in the code now, we're addressing. We've got you on that. We're going to make sure those are covered. But
I'll make it.
we're trying to make that separation between the policy and the administrative, and anything policy related, we would suggest probably go in the TMC.
Okay.
And then the personnel code probably wouldn't even be needed.
Okay, thank you.
So the next we have is Article 4, Section 4, hours of employment. That's on pages 29, 30, and 31 of the existing personnel code. But we have an ARR on this one. That's in ARR 103, overtime and comp time, which is attached.
Oh, sorry, I had a question on military leave. So when they're on military leave, they don't accrue any benefits. How does that affect health insurance for their family?
So when they go out on military leave, and I'm thinking that, it's generally that 2 weeks annual training, or it's a deployment where we would get into impacting benefits. The employee has the option of continuing and paying 100% of the premium. But if they're on a deployment of greater than 30 days, they can also have military insurance pickup. So they have a choice, and there's a leave of absence process where they will designate those things on a form at the time prior to going out on leave.
Okay. It's hard enough for their families while they're gone. I certainly wouldn't want us to get in the way of making it worse.
The other thing is that there's provisions under the ERISA that allow that if, they come back in the middle of a month, then we can put them back on our plan outside of the normal rules as well.
Okay. Cool.
Mr. Jensen, where was that you're saying that?
It
Sorry.
is.
I didn't think it was in this
Well,
one.
it just
but
says
It's
no.
later on, and I think it's going to be in Article
Well,
7, Section 4, maybe.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, we're
Yeah,
not
we're
there
not
yet.
okay.
We're
Oh,
gonna
I'm
get
sorry.
there.
I thought we'd already skipped through that and went on to hours of employment.
Yeah, so hours of employment are addressed in ARR 103, and it's the overtime and comp time provision. So you have a work week definition down at the bottom, talks about 7 consecutive 24-hour periods, beginning Saturday morning, 12 a.m., extending through Friday evening, 11:59 p.m. So that's kind of more along the lines of matching up with what's in the code here. There is a very explicit military leave policy ARR that's later on. Very,
For some reason, my computer thinks that's first.
very detailed. So, okay. We next have Article 4, Section 5. This is talking about receipt of pay. Again, this really ties into ARR 103, but specifically in Section 5E. 5E, it talks about when FLSA, non-exempt employee, leaves employment, all accrued unused comp time will be paid out. So it's just a small piece of what was in the code, but we wanted to show you where it's covered and what we are proposing now. Article 4, Section 6 of the Personnel Code talks about temporary and seasonal employees. And we have ARR 129 and ARR 118 that kind of touch upon the language that's found in the Personnel Code. 129 deals with recruitment and selection. And it talks about, in one of the definitions, temporary work, defines temporary work as an employment situation where working arrangement is limited to a certain period of time based on the needs of the city. And it's basically done by folks that we hire through a contracting employment agency. So whether that be Hilly Services or there's another one that we use. Yes, yes. So that's how we cover temporary work. And then temporary employees are also defined as being hired through a temporary employment agency. And there's obviously certain forms that you have to fill out in order to get those workers on board. And then we have, if you go to the last page of ARR 118, a lot more detail as far as what temporary service agency workers are and do and all of that.
Is there a
good stuff.
particular reason we have to use a temp agency? And because I know there's a lot of overhead there, but Yes is an acceptable answer.
Yes is the answer. and it's because of some of the regulation changes that come about with the adoption of the Affordable Care Act. And if there is an offering of benefits so what we have found is that it's easier to comply by having those assignments run through a temporary agency, because then they're employees of that agency, and they have their benefits based on varying assignments, not just pulling people on and off of our plan. There is a bill rate associated with that, but they also cover all the work comp expenses as well. So for those shorter term periods of time, it is easier to comply with all the various regulations. We do allow very short stints of temporary employment, and all of our interns, all of our paid intern positions are city temps is how we refer to them, and they do not run through an agency. They are on the city's payroll as temporary employees.
Good enough for me.
Any other questions? Okay. Now we're into Article 5. So we'll get into sections 1 and 2 that deal with performance evaluation. Again, I think we talked about this earlier and with regard to another personnel code section, but ARR 132 deals with performance evaluation and probation. ARR 133 deals with position description. So again, the provisions in those ARRs kind of match up with where things are. And again, I reattached the performance evaluation and probation, this piece, just so you can see where everything matches up. There's it's a little bit duplicative, but I think it's easier to follow if you just have it in front of you.
Does any of this contain a position description for a council person? I mean, I know that we're somewhat of an interesting.
It's not an applied.
Yeah,
You're
but
not really applying like a traditional employee.
yeah, and that's true. But when you talk about setting expectations for our roles for the community, there are a lot of folks that don't know what our responsibilities and our roles are, and that's another thing. Just like this, the statement of interest, it might be useful to put on our website. And what's a council person do? What are their responsibilities? How does that work?
Some of our constituents would say, not much. but point taken.
Yeah. And there's a lot of things that people we do that people don't know that we do.
Absolutely.
That's true.
Yeah.
Okay, so next is Article 5, Section 4. This talks about appeals. This is in ARR 1325. Again, I touched on it previously, but there's an appeal section that's contained in ARR 132, Roman numeral 5, on the way that an employee can go about appealing a decision on his or her evaluation that he or she may not necessarily agree with. And Personnel Code, Article 5, Section 5 on salary merit review. We touched on this again when we talked about merit increases. This corresponds with ARR 131, merit increases. So we've already talked about that one. So now we're into Article 6. Article 6, promotions. And then this corresponding ARR on this one is 123.
So is this where we're going to cover discounts on things too? Wrong kind of promotions. It's a joke, people. Come on.
I was following you.
I'll be here all day.
So in the Personnel Code provision, you have just a very short section that's entitled General, a very short section that's titled Qualifications, and just a one-liner that talks about salary. But in the ARR that's attached, you'll see a very much more explicit policy on how promotions, transfers, demotions, and reassignments are accomplished.
Yeah, if I may. Under qualifications, I see it saying that 2 years experience in a lesser classification for 1 year of college. And is that a cumulative thing? If they have 4 years, is that same as 2 years of college and so on and so forth?
That's how that provision is administered today, and under the Personnel Code, yes. And what this would do, however, is it would really fall back to the position description and whether or not that would apply. As it is under the code, that's universal for all positions, and that might not make sense for all levels of positions within the city. So this is one of those areas where it gives the city manager a little bit more flexibility to say an absolute degree might be required for certain positions. And so, for example, an accountant, for example, it might not be in the city's best interest to allow that sort of substitution. And so that just gives a little bit more discretion and flexibility to look at it based on the type of work.
Great.
We generally want the bridge engineers to have degrees in civil engineering.
Absolutely.
Going to be a professional engineer, yes.
So,
I asked just because, in all the years I've worked with guys, particularly in the water and WPC areas, that fantastic guys that, somebody coming 4 years out of college doesn't know near as much as these people, frankly. So I'd hope that didn't hold those people back, so.
It does not, and that's kind of the other thing that we try to use that acting out of class for, is to help develop those sorts of skills to help them prepare and internally grow for that next level, particularly with the frontline supervision. That's the practice that we try to employ.
So I know there are a number of colleges out there now that will take a look at your professional life and translate some of those into college credit. I wonder if this is an interesting partnership with Washburn to see if, somebody that has a depth of experience like that, if that could translate into a degree for them with, obviously you need general educations and that sort of thing, but
So we do have a relationship like that already with Washburn and Rasmussen with our police academy, particularly towards criminal justice degrees.
excellent.
And I know that Rasmussen is another college that looks very closely at the practical experience and does equate that back to college credits. We have those colleges come in during our benefits and wellness fair annually and talk about that with employees, and then employees
cool.
can set up one-on-ones to get more information. So that is in existence with some of the area universities.
Fantastic.
yeah, that's good. Speaking of experience, there was one gentleman I spoke to who claimed to know where all of the water meters were in town. He's been around that long.
Wow. Well,
All right, ready for the next one?
So we are now through 4, 5, and 6, Articles 4, 5, and 6, and we're into Article 7 of the Personnel Code, Section 1. This one talks about flexible compensation plan. This is kind of one of those really good examples of way too long since this thing's been looked at,
Yeah.
because it goes on and on about flexible compensation plan, and really that's just a small piece of the type of benefit package that there is. So in healthcare. So what we did, actually, there was an existing ARR, I believe, or this might have been one that yes, we repealed and replaced. So we have an ARR 106 on this, and it's entitled Employee Healthcare Benefits. It talks about flexible spending. If you just see, there's a little reference to it in the summary piece, flexible spending, but it also talks about how you have to qualify, how you're eligible for health care, what the premium equivalents are. Talks a little bit about the Healthcare Advisory Committee, which I'm not sure how new that is, but
3 or 4 years.
yeah.
2012, April of 2012 is when that ordinance was adopted.
So it kind of discusses that, talks about how you enroll, how healthcare contingent covered through COBRA. So it's a lot more elaborate and so much more up to date than where we were with what's in the personnel code right now. So I think this will be a really helpful language to have in place.
Mrs. Robertson, if I could ask on that, and maybe I misunderstood before, but when you show this, are you saying that this will be repealed and replaced with this?
Well,
Is that-
I'm showing what the comparison language is. So we went through the personnel code and tried to find every ARR and every policy that has been administratively adopted in accordance with the code, allows you to adopt administrative rules and regulations.
Sure.
So that's been happening over the course of 2 decades. So rather than going in and updating the personnel code, it's been done administratively through ARRs. So what I'm trying to do is show what in the personnel code is addressed in existing ARRs
okay.
so that you can see.
Not repealed, just here's how it's like in federal government, there's legislation, then there's rulemaking the agencies do, and this is the rulemaking here.
But in our opinion, as a staff, we don't think that the personnel code as it's written right now makes sense. And as I was saying before, anything that would be a policy-related matter, I think our recommendation would be that that's codified in the TMC, and anything that is administratively, a city manager decision under the form of government we have now would be in the personnel manual. There would not really be a need for the personnel code at that point in time.
Gotcha.
And if I could clarify, Mr. Emerson, I referred to repeal and replace because we had an older ARR that covered health care benefits, and as part of our recent review process, we repealed that entire
Yes.
administrative rule and reg and replaced it with this new one. And the biggest thing was we were trying to capture that healthcare advisory committee ordinance, the healthcare cost share and how that works, and that was not covered in the prior administrative rule. So administratively, this is a relatively new rule in addition to the language that's in the personnel code.
Okay, thank you for that. But as we're going through these, if there's already an administrative rule and regulation, is it staff's position that the portion of the personnel code that deals with that should be eventually deleted, basically, or struck?
Yes.
Okay.
Would you then say CARR 118 or something like that?
We could do that. I mean, that would be a very short personnel code because it'd just have an article and say, see
Table
this.
content, an index, yeah.
So I think that's why because the personnel code isn't codified. It's, I think, adopted via resolution, if I recall correctly. Amendments are adopted via resolution. It's referenced in the TMC that there shall be a personnel code established. And that TMC was written back when it was the strong mayor form of government. So amendments since that time have been made through resolution. So when you make amendments to it, they're not codified anywhere. They're just kind of through these resolutions, and when you want to see when something was adopted or when something was taken out, you have to pull all the resolutions and try to look to see when that happened. And just from my perspective, I think that the personnel code, if you get a personnel manual in place, won't be necessary. Okay. All these ARRs that we have and all these policies that we have, they're all separate documents right now.
Okay.
So when I say ARR 108, it's a separate document. And when I say P104, that's a separate document. And right now, they're all on the city's intranet. So if you want to see something on holidays, you have to find the ARR on holidays, go and click on that document, pull it up and look. But we're talking about taking all of those ARRs and policies on the intranet and combining them into one document that we would call a personnel manual. That would be the administrative personnel document, so that an employee can just take that one document and look at holidays. And if, by the way, that brings up another question on, vacation, then he could just skim back a couple pages and look, rather than going back on and clicking on that separate vacation ARR to see what he needs to see. And I think Catherine and Jackie can really speak to it better than I can, because I've only been here for a few years. But the other part of it is when we're trying to, whether it's negotiating a bargaining unit agreement or making changes, there are so many places that we have to refer to.
Sure.
We have to look at the personnel code, make sure that we see what it says in there about holidays. And then we have to look at the ARR to see what it says about holidays. And then we have to go to the TMC to see what it says about holidays. And we have to go to the bargaining unit agreement to see what those say about holidays. And I think that makes it difficult, time consuming, and
Absolutely.
it's kind of like, I view it as kind of the whole RPI mindset. how do we take out all these steps and streamline the process so that it's easier to accomplish what we need to accomplish in the least amount of time possible and do it as accurately as possible.
Absolutely, yeah, there should be one place where you can go and look at all these things. These things are only one place, there's not a different rule over here or a different way of saying the same thing over and
And
over.
I would love for you guys to chime in, because they have dealt with this quite a lot more than I have.
Well, and I would say that if it's challenging for Catherine and I to navigate all of those different places
boy,
from an HR
yeah.
perspective, how in the world could we hold employees accountable? And so my goal with all of this is to make it as easy as possible for employees to know exactly what we hold them accountable to as an employer. And if I have to know that it's in the code and an ARR and here and there, is it fair to hold an employee accountable to that when they only deal with things incidentally? And so definitely that ease of use and better way of knowing what we expect of employees as an employer is the end goal that I have in mind with all of this.
And each of the ARRs and policies that were adopted administratively, and this is stated actually in the personnel code, to do that, to implement those, you have to go through a process. So you have to draft it, then you have to hold employee hearings. And I mean, these haven't been, I guess, done in a vacuum, because employees are offered the opportunity to come in, sit down, go through them. And I always give I think it was the vehicle use policy as a really good example of a hearing that was held with employees when that was being considered, and really good input from the employees that was implemented. Well, did you think about this or this? And it hadn't been thought of, and they were just great points. So that language got incorporated. So, wait. Okay. So, any more
Holidays.
questions?
Yeah,
All right.
Good, thank you.
Okay. So Article 7, Section 2 on holidays. It's in the page 41 of the Personnel Code.
I thought we voted last year to make Mr. Emerson's birthday a holiday.
Absolutely. I thought it's a national holiday, federal holiday anyway.
I think it's tomorrow.
No, I'm kidding. No,
Is that today?
no,
We can
no.
all leave right now, right?
No, we do have a meeting this year on it though, yeah.
So you'll see the corresponding ARR 108 that deals with holidays. A little bit more explanation, but this one looks pretty much like what's in the personnel code right now. Then there's Article 7, Section 3. This one deals with vacations. It's shown on pages 41, 42 of the Personnel Code. The corresponding ARR is 107. And it talks about how vacations accrued during initial probation, what the accrual rates are, gives a little chart, shows 40-hour employees versus 24-hour employees, carryover.
Is this where it talks about how we can't have an entire department going on vacation at one time?
That's not covered in the ARR, but that would certainly be a performance issue.
Yeah. Well, and I only bring that up because it's nice if there is some sort, I don't want to say a published standard, but some sort of guidance that employees know. If I know all my coworkers are going on vacation, I probably shouldn't.
Not gonna get it.
Yeah, not everybody's going to get it, so.
There is, in most of the bargaining unit agreements, those sorts of things are covered, and
Okay.
a lot of them have, some seniority-based process but it always ensures adequate staffing for
Okay.
departmental operations.
Good enough for me.
And for instance, just to add a little bit in an administrative, non-bargaining unit department, for instance, during Christmas time, the Christmas season, I'll check with people, hey, who's going to be gone where, just to make sure that we have coverage during the
Somebody
office.
can
And
answer the phone.
I think most of the department directors will do that to make sure
Okay.
there's adequate coverage and adequate people in the office, so.
Just a little added to that, we have a really nice tool within our time and attendance system. Within IntelliTime, there's a calendar, so at a glance, department director can see who's requested and who's been approved. And so I particularly use that tool a lot around the holidays when I'm approving or not approving time off. So Well, it's not expressly stated. There are absolutely tools in place to make sure that we can easily monitor that.
Does that make it easy for employees to see when days are available for vacation?
Yes. They
Perfect.
can see their
They use that too.
group. Yes.
Excellent.
Okay. Article 7, Section 4A on sick leave. It's found at pages 42, 43, and 44 of the Personnel Code, and there's an ARR on this, ARR 110, entitled Sick Leave.
Wouldn't that be nice?
A lot more detail in this one, but I think it covers everything that's
Does this have a
important.
provision in place to prevent sick outs? Not that we run into that problem because we have fantastic employees that love us, but sick outs.
doesn't. Have
So,
It does not.
okay.
The only real instance of that I've experienced was a bargaining unit issue, and I believe that then it fell under the prohibited practices under the Kansas PIRA, and that's how we handled that.
Excellent.
Next, there's Article 7, Section 4B. This talks about medical disability leave. And we think that this is the FMLA. But I couldn't tell from the title and the Personnel Code when I talked about medical disability leave. But we're considering this to be the whatever, 3 paragraphs that are in the Personnel Code now. We consider this to be FMLA, and it's covered by P107, which is an 8-page policy, a little bit more detailed and provides a lot more direction for employees and information for them when they're anticipating having to take FMLA leave. And in FMLA, there's a military leave component in FMLA, so you'll see that that's addressed on page 2. But there's also, we'll talk about a little bit later here, a military leave component that's not tied to FMLA. So military leave's addressed in a couple places. One's just part of the Family Medical Leave Act.
Could have skipped 12 council meetings with that? Man. I had to beg and plead to get her to have the baby on a Saturday.
And speaking of military leave, the very next one. It's Article 7, Section 4C in the Personnel Code talks about military leaves, and we have a corresponding ARR 124, it talks about military leaves. Do you have it?
No, it's all right.
Oh, okay. So does this cover, like, I know you had asked a question about that previously, Councilmember Jensen, about military leave, and if, I think this.
I think so.
cover-
I just didn't want to create an additional hardship for an employee's family while they're on military leave, if there's not a reason to. But if they're covered by other things, then that's,
Yeah.
that's fine with me.
There's a military leave ARR, and there's also on the FMLA, so.
If I may ask on that, and I'm sorry, it's probably in here somewhere, but you guys might know this. What do we do? I guess depending on your rank and everything in the military, a lot of these people, especially if they're lower rank in the military, their city pay may be much higher than what they get from the military. Do we do anything as a city to make up that differential?
Under the ARR, what we do is some employers have it be a differential and they have to submit what they're paid by the military. And administratively, there's lags with when the military pay starts, when you go out on military leave, and to try to make sure that employees aren't having that hardship. What we have done in Section 4 of the ARR 124 is, instead of it being a reimbursement or an offset, we provide a maximum of 80 hours of military pay per year for all uniformed service members. And that, the rationale for the 80 hours is that many ranks require the 2 weeks of annual
Right.
training. And so this would cover that time away from work and hopefully not have any interruption in their normal city pay. And then if they're in a situation where they're not required for that 2 weeks of annual leave, they could use that 80 hours for weekend drills. And so what we've tried to do is design a policy that provides pay continuation for everything except for long-term deployments.
And I appreciate that. I think that's a great solution for that. I guess my thought, though, is especially, seems like the reserves and the Guard, in the old days, they were only doing the 2 weeks, and now they're almost our frontline personnel in a lot of cases. Military personnel. And you see, it's not uncommon to have somebody, my neighbor was deployed for 9 months last year. And so after that 2 weeks is exhausted, we don't do anything else as far as a differential. Is that correct?
We do not. However, when an employee goes out on a long-term leave, they can elect to whether or not they want to use some vacation or accrued comp time until, to supplement that military pay. But the paid service at this point is the 80 hours. Some employees elect not to use that, and then they have those accruals available to them when they return to work. So it's one of those choices that we do offer for them.
I would like to know if it'd be possible, maybe for our next meeting, to give us an idea of what it would cost the city to make up that differential for long-term deployments.
And is there a certain amount of time for, are you thinking for up to a year or?
Yes.
Okay.
Can you just say the term of deployment?
Yeah, the term of deployment, right. Maybe how many employees that would typically affect, and what might be the financial burden to the city of doing that, because I bet you're going to find out it's not a very big burden, but it's a huge burden on the families if the person's making 50% of what they made, and they're also deployed on top of that.
Sure.
So I would.
We'll kind of do a look back of our military leave over the last year or two, and then try to anticipate what a full pay continuation average might be from that.
Okay, thank you.
Article 7.4D talks about court appearance. We have an ARR on this, ARR 113, entitled Court Appearance Leave. It's pretty straightforward. If there's any questions on that?
Do we pay for people for jury duty?
We do.
Okay.
The only thing I think is if you are showing up in a civil proceeding that you are,
Yeah.
You're the defendant or
Yeah.
the.
you're the,
How would jury
Or the
duty
plaintiff.
work with a council person in the council meeting?
what?
How would jury duty work with a council person in a council meeting? I mean, not the compensation part, but if a council
Like,
person.
Kind of
so-
like if you were
After
sequestered
hours?
or something, or
Right,
your
exactly.
time
So
went.
how do we handle that situation? I mean, I realize that's
Right,
rare,
just
but
miss the council
still.
meeting.
You just, yeah.
Miss.
Okay.
You're volunteering for juries all over town now.
no, I'm because we're supposed to be at the council meetings as required by law, and we're supposed to be in jury duty as required by law. So now you've got two opposing things, and that's not
I
necessarily.
go to jury duty.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that because that's a civic duty, and I think that most council members would
Yeah.
say that's
Do that first.
Okay, so the city's not required to cancel the meeting because of a council person who's sequestered for whatever other governmental duty.
I would not think so.
Okay.
It kind of hits me that this
Judge
is
would see it.
almost akin to military leave.
Yeah.
Not
But
favorably.
yet there's no 80-hour
You missed it.
limit on this. I had a friend who worked for Santa Fe, and he was on a jury, I think it was a federal jury, and it was like 3 months he was on this jury.
Wow.
Dang.
And so it seems to me like this puts us on the, has the city on, and maybe this is required, but how's this any different from being ordered onto military leave, but yet there's no time limit on this?
I think that it's the policy used to be that that we would offset your pay with the jury duty, but I think it's like $10 a day,
Yeah.
and
Right.
federal was a little bit different, and the administrative time of finance and payroll calculating that versus just having a pay code that says we're paying you for jury duty. It was because it's such a nominal amount that you
Sure.
receive and pay from the court. So that's the rationale for why this language is like that. But they're both kind of those duties that, so certainly we'll look at the military.
Sure.
I would assume most people are checking their email anyway at the evening, trying to stay caught up, so.
Okay, Article 7, Section 4E, voting time. There's a corresponding ARR 114, talks about voting leave. Very straightforward. Usually takes me 3 hours to vote and not 2, and so I'm just going to lose that hour.
Do we encourage them to vote by mail?
Pardon me?
Do we encourage employees to vote by mail?
We really can't.
Yeah,
I mean, we
they
could
can vote however
suggest
way they
it,
want.
Yeah, because there's no cost to
Well,
us to do that.
You could suggest it.
but
I
it's
don't
their
think we
right,
can.
by law, by state statute.
Okay.
That's what we're following here. Yeah, several department directors have asked that same question.
Okay. I mean, not that I don't want somebody not to have either option to vote, but, I mean, I vote by mail routinely anyway, because it's so easy.
Yeah.
And this is pretty standard too, I think the 2 hour. I've seen a few policies like this and it's. Okay, Article 7, Section 4F, this deals with leave due to inclement weather. And we have a policy on this, P116. It's entitled Declaration of Inclement Weather. Oddly enough, for some reason, this seems to be a hot topic. It doesn't happen very often, but boy, when there's inclement weather, everybody's, what, are we going to get released early? And it's just best to have this kind of outlined in the way in which we do. It's pretty explicit, but I think it really just needs to be based on the inquiries that come in when the weather starts getting bad. So we think this is fairly comprehensive and ran it by Brant. Obviously, if it's a policy, he signs off on it as the city manager, and he is very comfortable with it as well. Next is Article 7, Section 4G. In the Personnel Code, this is entitled Emergency Leaves. We kind of broke it up into two separate ARRs. One is funeral or bereavement leave, and the other is family crisis leave. I was very familiar with the funeral leave piece from other communities. The family crisis leave, I wasn't so much. So I don't know, how long it's been. Well, obviously since '91 at least, it's been in effect. But we thought they were different enough to kind of divide them up into two separate ARRs. It's family crisis, fire, flood, tornado. So, any questions on that one? Okay. Then there's Article 7, Section 4H, Personal Leave Day. We have an ARR on that, ARR 112, same title. It's pretty straightforward. Easy to follow. You get one personal day. Take whenever you want.
What did that day used to be? Was that a holiday that was just kind of
I don't know what the
Made
history
generic,
behind that
or-
is, because we, in St. Joe, we didn't have a personal leave day, but we had an extra holiday. But I'm not familiar with where that came from.
Yeah, I don't know the history of it being in
Okay.
the code.
Okay, then Article 7, Section 4I, leave of absence without pay. There's a corresponding ARR 120, which is entitled Extended Leave of Absence. Those leaves shall not extend 1 year in length.
Does this happen very often?
It's pretty rare outside of a medical condition that extends beyond the 12 weeks of FMLA protection. That's generally the types of extended leaves that we see.
And there's Article 7, Section 4J, leave agreements, and Article 7, Section 5, extended sick leave benefits. These two provisions are addressed in ARR 109, which is entitled Extended Sick Leave. Yeah, so this affords employees who have been diagnosed with a terminal illness up to 520 hours of additional sick leave benefits.
It's like 6 months, no, 3 months, isn't it? And that's just, is a thought here, you know, you're gonna, I mean, you're gonna die, I mean, and we don't wanna make it any more harder on your families, that's,
I can presume that that's the rationale for the language in the personnel code. And so we've certainly carried that rationale over into the extended sick leave. Another thing is that if there are long-term illnesses that are not terminal, we do have shared leave where employees can donate leave to employees. And so a lot of times these will work in conjunction with each other. So if it's a long-term illness, they may have been on shared leave for a period of time, then it may extend over to extended sick leave. And really what the goal would be is to try to get that person to the long-term disability eligibility under CAPERS, which is 6 months for CAPERS, and KPNF is first day of disability, so they don't have that longer period of time. But if I had to try to back into why this was originally put into the personnel code, it was try to help employees get to the long-term disability eligibility.
that makes sense, thank you.
And we don't require them to pay for a temporary employee to fill in while they're gone.
We absolutely do not.
California's figuring out that's not such a good idea right now.
Good old California.
Oh, man.
And then the last section in Article 7 of the Personnel Code, Section 6, is entitled Retirement Systems, and we have a corresponding ARR 130 on retirement systems. The language in the Personnel Code, very, very, very minimal, and so what's in the ARR that you have before you is a lot more detailed, provides the employee that's going to be looking to see what's covered under retirement systems with a lot more information, what he or she needs with respect to that.
Do we have any legacy pensions or anything like that that are left over, or we all just pretty much moved to CAPERS by now?
All of the employees are on CAPERS, and our deferred compensation is the CAPERS deferred compensation. Those prior deferred compensation programs, if they wanted to continue those, they are able to turn that over into more of a IRA. They could leave their money there, or they can continue to contribute on an after-tax basis directly with that prior vendor.
Okay. But we're not on the hook for any traditional pensions.
We are not.
Excellent.
So that gets us through Articles 4, 5, 6, and 7. The only articles that are left are 8, 9, and 10. 8 is non-disciplinary reduction in force. It deals with short-term reduction like layoffs or permanent reduction, and that's where the severance pay issue is talked about that I mentioned previously. And then corrective and disciplinary action is Article 9, and Article 10 deals with grievances. I think these are all administrative functions as well, with the exception of the severance pay issue that, you know, obviously I think has some budgetary impact. So I would say probably maybe touch upon those at the next meeting we have, and perhaps start looking at what's in the TMC right now and what we think should be in the TMC, what should be carried over from the personnel code as it exists now that's important enough policy-wise to be codified, and what is fine to leave to the hopefully new personnel manual. Does that sound like a plan? Or do you guys have any, I mean, we're open to suggestions on, you know, if there's a different process that makes more sense and is easier to follow.
I like going through it like this.
Yeah, that's
I think
great.
we're doing well.
Okay.
There seemed to be an issue with our next date, May 16th. Is there a way we could see if we could maybe reschedule that while we're here?
What was the issue? What was it?
I'm going to be out of
This-
town.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I
okay.
apologize. I
No,
came
that's,
up fairly last minute, so.
no, that's okay. I'm available on the
Like Wednesday, the 15th, the day before?
Yeah, ironically, I have a city project bidding that day, but I could. I mean, I can make it in the morning. I can get the
14th?
thing done.
Like,
For an hour, we might could do it.
Same
just for-
time.
do you think 9 a.m. would be the same time? If we moved it up a little early?
We'd find somewhere.
Okay.
Okay,
Just go to them.
okay.
I'm fine with
We
that.
needed to
Yeah,
move it up
that's
to
amenable.
8:30 or something?
Oh,
Would that be
third.
okay?
I mean, earlier would be better for me,
June 3rd.
Okay.
but
You want to do
Almost.
7:30? We'll just have somebody bring coffee.
absolutely, I'm ready. Yeah.
The rest of the staff is not excited
Yes.
about that.
Okay, I'm sorry.
What day are you all
So
talking about?
Wednesday at 5:30 a.m.
Yes.
I'll be in bed then.
Wednesday
nine.
morning.
Wednesday morning. We have department directors meeting
At 8:30.
8:30.
This would be a great excuse for you to get out of that. I'd like to come to this meeting, but I got to go to this policy and
They've called
finance.
a policy and finance meeting.
We could,
We can meet for an hour and talk about these last 3 articles. And then on,
yeah, I don't know what time you were thinking of starting.
What time's your department?
Would it-
It's at 8:30. Certainly, we could do
Oh,
like
so 9:30
or
or
10.
10?
Yeah.
I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Think you could find something that would work for that? Okay.
9:30 or 10. And we will, we'll have those last 3, we'll just discuss those because there's not any corresponding ARRs or policies that were adopted administratively that at least I could find on the last 3 articles. So we'll just kind of talk to you all about where you think those should logically be, and then maybe just do a brief overview of what's in the code and kind of how it makes sense to restructure that. A lot of what's in the code right now is concerning to me. It's very, very outdated, and there's some references, like, I think one is old age insurance or something. I mean, I just, wow,
Is that a thing? Old age insurance?
Oh,
we
yeah, it's a,
definitely
Wow.
need to, so, we'll use the meeting on the 15th maybe as a, what do we want to do with those last 3 articles in the personnel code now, and maybe just highlight some of the really outdated information that's in the TMC. And then on June 3rd, maybe we'll start getting into the TMC in earnest a little bit, if that works.
I'm fine with that.
And we'll know what our marching orders are. Okay.
All right,
Thank
very
you
good.
all.
Cool.
Really
There-
appreciate it.
Any other items before the committee?
Motion to adjourn.
I'll second that.
okay.
Meeting's adjourned.
Aye.
That was easy. Wait, you have one.